All right, hi everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the Carvel Office Hours. These are held every second and fourth Thursday of the month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. It's an opportunity for users to come and get help from the maintainers, anything they have need more in-depth help on, or any pending questions that you have about the Carvel tool suite. Or if you just want to come and listen in, whatever the maintainers are working on or have discussions on, this is just a really good opportunity for that. Just a reminder that we are recording this and it's uploaded to our YouTube playlist. And we ask that everyone that attends these meetings read and abide by our code of conduct, which can be found here in the agenda. If you aren't able to attend the office hours, we also meet every Monday for our community meetings at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time. And that's just where the maintainers will go over some of the items they are working on based on the project roadmap. And you can also listen in and ask for any help you may have in that meeting as well. We are not meeting next Monday for that community meeting, so the next opportunity for you would be on Monday, June 7th, I believe is the date for that. When you attend the meetings, we also ask that you put in your name and the organization that you represent. If there is one that you're representing while attending these meetings, it's just a way for us to keep track of folks from the community that engage with us in this way, and we can keep the conversations going outside of the meeting. And other opportunities you have to engage with us include the Kubernetes Slack workspace and the Carvel channel, and then on Twitter at Carvel_dev, and that's DEV. Today we have just one item on our discussion topics area, but if you have anything that you wish to discuss, please add that to the discussion topics here. If there's any open questions or help you may need, add it to the section just below that. And with that, I'm going to kick it on over to John to go over the discussion topic.
Cool. Thanks, Nancy. All right, so the first topic here is, I'm going to share my screen, have the doc up. There we go. Can you see that? One moment, trying to get, oh, hello. Oop. There we go. You can see that tab?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So at one point we had we were really trying to get ourselves organized about how do we deal with and give respectful attention to community input through GitHub issues. And when we first created so we wanted to propose how we would approach that. So when this document first came into being, it was many months ago, and it was about trying to get to rally around a particular approach. And within that, there was a whole lot of conversation about just overall workflow and then possible ways in which we can automate that workflow. And all of it was geared toward trying to having a consistent way to handle that work so that community members had the same experience regardless of which of the Carvel teams they were interacting with, or which boards they were in, which GitHub repos they were looking at, that it was consistent in a helpful way. And we made a lot of progress. There are a bunch of stuff in that proposal around how to automate things and making our backlogs more public. And we've done a lot of that work. And then we were looking to evolve it to the next step. So within one of the Carvel teams, the Kubernetes Lifecycle team, there's like a particular significant amount of stuff that we know that we haven't been able to get to. And part of it is that it's hard to know what items need attention and what kind of attention and what kind of context somebody would need to have and able to like move an issue forward. It's not just some ideas it's hard to make heads or tails of whether or not they are relevant for the project, or if they are they timely, and is it something we want to commit to? And we want to be really careful. We want to try and be clear about what can the maintainers work on, what work, even if the maintainers can't work on, would be great to work on, and we would accept those contributions, and what items are either too fuzzy or out of the scope for what the projects are trying to accomplish. And that's not always obvious from the outside. So trying to help make that more clear. That's sort of the overall, it's been our overall goal. So, so this proposal got reused and it's starting to turn into more of like a process definition document. So there's a lot of stuff that was describing it. So we sort of just repurposed it for that. So I thought it'd be useful if we kind of went over this together synchronously to kind of have a shared idea of what's being described here, and we can talk about where to go from there. So I don't think we haven't updated the goals and anti-goals here. I think this is in this status is sort of kind of a remnant of it being a proposal. We'll probably end up reworking that into something that reads more like, this is how we're doing it. So it becomes a more of an authoritative doc rather than just a proposal. So we'll skip over that for now. The first section was about labels. It's handy to just sort of have these loaded up as we talk about the issue states and the workflow steps. You can kind of see where we're going in the outline over here if you want to cheat and look ahead. But so from the top, there's sort of three different kind of categories of labels. There are the types of issues that there are. There are different states that an issue would go through, or a condition that can be attributed to an issue. And then whether or not there's sort of like an additional adjective about the issue. For example, if this is a great issue for someone who's new to the project, wants to contribute, is this something where it's sufficiently valuable yet not requiring a ton of context to work on, for example? So as you're looking over those, any comments or ideas pop up there?
Will ready for dev be a subset of recommended?
That's a good question. I think that, so the meaning of these are different. The ready for dev says that it's sufficiently precise, like it has a definition of done. So it could be precisely specified, but it's not targeted to be prioritized into the maintainer's backlog.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's sort of what I was getting at, is like ready for dev is just something that if I was somebody wanting to contribute and wasn't looking for like good first issue or something like that, like I had contributed before, I could look for ready for dev. Like that's the go-to one for maybe more experienced contributors or something that aren't following our backlog or something.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, I think Daniel identified asynchronously some potential overlap here on can be replicated. So the intention of this label was to note when a bug wasn't just recognized as, hey, yeah, that looks like a potential problem, but we actually did the work to verify, yeah, I've actually seen this myself. I can replicate it. There's a proposal on the table of like, that might just well be what Carvel accepted means for a bug. Like you couldn't Carvel accept it. We would make that a definition of Carvel accepted for a bug. It's like, well, you'd have to have replicated it in order to accept it. So that was one, it seems like that made a lot of sense.
Do we expect that life cycle, assuming for now, like can be replicated is kept, like whether or not that gets folded into Carvel accepted, I don't think matters for this question, but would we expect it to be like Carvel triage, we work on it, replicate it, see that it can be replicated, then would it go to like ready for dev once we sort of outline what the solution or what we want the thing to look like and then recommended from there? Or would we expect people to just pick up something that can be replicated?
I see. I see. So it's not just that the defect was identified, there's this additional step of that's great, but what would the solution be?
Yeah,
And okay, I see.
and maybe that's obvious for most bugs, which
Hmm.
is maybe true. Like if you see a panic, solution is don't panic or like find a way to make it better. But
Right.
just curious if we want to sort of bake that potential scenario of like it's a bug, but how do we want to fix it into the life cycle of a bug issue?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, the way that you described that sequence of events. What also occurs to me is part of what we're also trying to do here, and I forgot about this in the sort of the preamble. Part of what prompted us to like really take a hard second look at this and come back to this proposal and make a process definition was that we wanted to be able to break down the work required to move a story along so that um, we could do little chunks to at least kick it forward. So it'd be nice to be able to like, hey, if I see that there's a new bug and it needs to get replicated, I could like do that replication, put in my research notes, mark it as replicated, and now whoever comes back to that can just at a glance know, oh, I don't see a definition of done here, but it's been replicated. I could probably take the next 20, 30 minutes maybe and like add that piece. So it's a way of kind of uh, um, minimizing the getting started to get ready to get going time on a particular issue. Uh, so that is one possibility that might like help. Like I'd say, you know, it'd be nice to just sort of hang on to that label so to make that clearer.
Mm-hmm. And it could also, I mean, if the fix is obvious, it could just jump straight to like ready for dev or something in that case.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, so maybe if we look through some of this is the issue states, this sort of implies a workflow too. So if you look at the outline here, uh, hopefully you recognize these words. These actually match well to the Zen Hub. They call them pipelines. That's the columns in the Zen Hub board. That's what we're using to track our backlog. It is available to anybody. You have to install the Zen Hub plugin. So that's one later question about like what's sort of the front door for somebody who would want to contribute. Today would be if you please install the Zen Hub plugin, and then you can sort of see that. But maybe we want to do something even more low tech. Anyway, so these are those different states. So ideally, these help describe. If you look in Zen Hub, you would see an issue in one of those swim lanes. Then the issues in there, ideally, they would be would meet that definition.
Are you showing us something, John?
You know what I did? I shared a tab as opposed to a window, I think. Yeah, sorry about that. That's all right. Let's just stay on the dock then. All right. Thank you, Joao. So the first issue is the first state is new issues. And so the way this is intended to be read is like the name of the state, quick description, what labels get added or removed to coming into this state. So add Carvel triage, and also whether it's a bug or enhancement. And then what happens here? So what happens here depends on the role, and this is where we're trying to like divide up the work. So we're working on making this more public, but we have like a contributor model that we're evolving that basically has three roles: a contributor, a reviewer, and an approver. And with each of those roles, there's an ever increasing amount of required context, like understanding and expertise, and a commitment to doing more work, more proactively doing work within that particular tool. So each tool we have in our portfolio in the Carvel suite, we have folks who've made commitments based off of like their ability to do so and their desire to do so. And so that's what this reviewer and approver mean. Those are someone who has enough context to understand what's the scope of the tool and has confidence that they can make decisions about, yeah, this is in scope, or and sometimes even be able to have a sense of, yeah, actually this is a priority. We can actually like pull this into the maintainer's backlog. That's what I mean by priority. And then the other role is the community pair. So this is meant to be really kind of almost anybody. Within our teams, we have a practice of dedicating time during the week to servicing community sourced issues and interrupts. Like that's why we have responsive times on Slack, in part because of the community pair. So these are these two roles. So if you're playing community pair for that day, then one of the things you can do is look in the new issues column and triage a bug. This is a link down into another section of the document that describes that process. But the TLDR is you got three possible outcomes for a particular issue. If you don't know if this is undesired behavior or not, like it's not obvious that this is actually a defect, as a community pair, you just skip it. That's fine. Like if you don't know, that's cool. If it is clear that it's undesirable, and it often is, then if you can reproduce it, then you record the work that you did. You record what someone would need to do in order to reproduce it, and you drop that label on there. And if it's not reproducible, then maybe it's obvious to you, like, oh, if we just knew this, or if we could ask the user to provide more information, that could help us reproduce it. And so this way, like a community pair goes through and they're looking for something in new issues that hasn't yet been replicated. So that's one thing that they can do. And then the reviewer approver, they can also triage bugs. And ideally, because this person has that context and that focus, they'd be able to actually know whether or not this is actually undesired behavior. And so give the rationale and close the issue at that point. That doesn't mean we like shut the door on the conversation, but this is like a determination, like actually, we wouldn't fix this because of this reason. And hopefully we understood. If not, like, let's keep the conversation going. But to keep things clear, we close the issue. If whether or not it's not clear whether or not it's relevant, that is, there's not enough information to make that determination, then we can describe that. And we turn this into, we're starting a discussion. Like, not sure I understand exactly. I can't tell that it's in or out, but let's talk about that. And here's a couple questions that I have. So that's a bug. If it's a feature, there's similar steps that you take here. But then there's these other parts where when we know that it's relevant and we don't know, we don't yet have a clear definition of done, at least we know it's relevant. So we can say, okay, we're going to accept this. It's a preliminary, like, yeah, this looks like this is in scope. And then it gets moved into that swim lane or that column, that pipeline. And so these are just links within the same document here that just says, okay, well, go to that step, and that's literally the next one. So either an issue.
John, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't think you're showing us what you're pointing to.
I'm not?
No, the last thing I can see is triage a feature with a link.
I don't see your cursor anywhere.
Yeah, so like
Something, okay.
in here.
I didn't share well. Let me just share my desktop. I'm not sure why that's not working right. Tried to share my browser. Can you see my mouse moving around now? Okay, thanks for saying something. Yeah, so I was talking about this section here and was pointing out that in these last three possible outcomes, we're actually pointing to like where would you move the issue after you've done whatever work was needed. So I'm just gonna pause here. That was really a lot to say. Comments, questions. Is this useful? Is this what can make it more useful?
This is sort
One
of.
thing,
Oh, go ahead.
okay. One thing that I noticed is like you could go straight into the unprioritized or prioritized backlog, but that insinuates that you would be like applying the labels from the previous swim lanes, because there's not like you're going to remove the Carvel triage label if you go into the unprioritized backlog. I remember from that section.
Yeah, that's a great point. That like what's not detailed here clearly, excuse me, is that when you've made that determination, like a clear definition of done, that that you add the ready for dev label there. And that
You
you've
also
added
be
the Carvel accepted, right? Yeah, that's a great point.
okay.
So what would we want to do? Would we want to just make sure that, hey, when you do that, just make you apply all those labels and, or just say, well, what you care about is like what labels are relevant for that particular pipeline?
Like I wouldn't want to see a Carvel triage and a ready for dev on the same issue.
Yeah.
That's the most I can ask for, I feel like. But going beyond that, making a stop at the Carvel accepted, do the labels, but if you can just go straight to unprioritized, then do the labels of Carvel accepted and unprioritized.
Mm-hmm.
A little extra work, but
Eli, it looked like you had a thought.
Yeah, it's sort of related. How do we see these ideas of ZenHub swim lanes interacting with issue labels? In the sense that if we make a contribution doc that says, search for issues that are ready for dev or something like that, but I assume some of the prioritized backlog where things have been talked about, there's sort of existing context, isn't something that we would want people to just jump in and pick up on their own without at least building up some of that context. So like, is there some interaction between where an issue is in its column versus what its labels are and what those labels mean?
Yeah, let's see. There's a lot of good stuff in there. So one thing that I heard in there was, as an outside contributor, how could I make heads or tails between labels I see on an issue if I'm just looking at a list of issues? Let's say I'm just search for ready for dev. How do I know from that list the things that are available for that have already been kind of marked as like, oh, the maintainers are going to work on this versus stuff that isn't?
Yeah, or like, is that something we want to consider of like, there's potentially built up context and all issues that are ready for dev may not be able to be picked up without some of that shared context being disseminated.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That like there's some way to indicate that. Yeah, because that is like one of ultimately be great if we could just support that scenario without like just automatically. Like if we can get to a point where the way we manage our work just makes it obvious what the disjoint that is available for others to contribute. Yeah. So I like that as a refinement in terms of like maybe another label here that describes like significant context or something.
Yeah, just something that like distinguishes further and ready for dev.
Available on the issue right now. Conversation with a maintainer would be needed to complete this issue successfully. Does that capture kind of what you're thinking about there? Yeah, okay. That's a great idea.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Have you seen the document that Aaron was working on? And it's in progress in the repo, the Carvel-community repo.
I have not seen this. These.
Because it sounds like he was also working on something similar. It hasn't touched it in a while, but
Yeah, this looks like, I think this is what we're doing today.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Cool. Yeah, in terms of like a canonical definition for these things, is that what you mean? Or just like, hey, are you aware that this other effort is happening?
a little bit of both. So
Okay.
he had put this in the governance doc, but when Jonas and I had taken a look at it, we felt that it should be in contributing, which is, I think, is also what you're thinking.
Yep.
And to help with the checklist to make sure the repo is healthy, I've been working on some of these documents to alleviate the team. And one of the things I was going to work on was the contributing doc. So it sounds like what we're discussing right now is going to lead towards the information that's going to be added to that contributing doc. So I'll table that until more discussion is had on these labels.
Okay, that's good to know. Just that like that's happening as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.
For sure.
So the change that you link there, it was part of an initial go that we made on adding like this information on a more public way. And what we're discussing today is like an evolution from it. So Aaron is not like actively working in parallel on something like this. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's like we're a distributed team or something. Cool. Okay, anything else about like the new issues stuff and how can you envision like how as new things come in that like folks can kick it forward regardless of if they have a lot of context or not a lot of context, they can help contribute to like at least bake the issue. Cool.
Something that like about what we were talking before, I hope, at least that's my hope, that when an issue gets to the prioritized backlog, it has enough information that anybody can pick it up. That's my expectation. It doesn't mean that everybody should pick it up, because if like the signal that we want to have between the unprioritized backlog and the prioritized backlog, it is more, this is going to be, the prioritized backlog is the work that the core team is going to be working actively. So if you are not a core member of the team and you want to pick up one of these stories, it should be okay, but you need to be aware that there's an expectation that this would be done pretty quickly or in a very quick pace.
I see.
So in the end, my expectation would be that having a story in an unprioritized backlog or prioritized backlog should have exactly the same amount of information on it.
Mm. Yeah, and so part of what I'm hearing in that is that this label could become problematic then, because then it's a step back from that. That like if there is context, then you should put it in there.
Yeah, I think that's what makes the pipeline work, right? Like we have these steps, and if you get things ready to be developed, they should have like enough information for people to be able to develop it.
Do you mind popping in the doc and dropping that comment on there? Because that's a really great point. Thank you, sir. Okay. So then the next column is Carvel accepted, and this is where we know that it's viable, it's product viable. But it hasn't been prioritized. So what that means is it's relevant sufficiently, but whether or not this is something that the maintainer teams can get to is not known yet. And it may not have a great definition of done either, but at least we know enough that's like, oh yeah, this sounds like, it's within the scope of the project. We think that kind of anybody can look through these and take a look and see whether or not, well, is there a definition of done? And if I can take a crack at that, then I can add the acceptance criteria. And if not, ask clarifying questions is one option as we're working our way through those items in that column. If there already is a clear definition of done, but we're not sure what the priority, like, and it's not clear whether or not this is something that we're already like, maybe it's not in the set of things we're already working on. That might be one reason why somebody may just intuitively know, like, oh yeah, this would be something we would prioritize because we're already working on that specific feature or something. But if it wasn't, then it would go into the unprioritized backlog. I'm going to kind of roll through these and just interrupt me if you have thoughts. So there are two backlogs then. There's a backlog that specifically has prioritization, which what we mean really is that it's prioritized for the maintainer teams. So once you get into Carvel accepted, that means that it's like legit, it's viable. So you can be rest assured that, I mean, that the spirit of that request or defect would be like something we would want to accept. So that gives you that little extra confidence. And then unprioritized just means we haven't yet determined whether or not it's something we're going to do right now. Could be, could not be. And so this would be a great column for somebody who is looking to contribute to like focus their attention on if they're looking in ZenHub.
Now, would that mean that those issues just remain open while they're hanging out in the unprioritized?
Yeah, I think at some point somewhere we were talking about and have some staling. Do we have our stale bot working? I know we had one point we were looking at that.
So we have the stale bot working, but only for Carvel triage labels.
Okay.
Not for anything else. And the idea would be for the unprioritized backlog to keep the issues open because it's something that we think it makes sense for the tool. but we as a core team haven't got around, didn't have like possibility to go around and implement it.
Mhm.
So it is something that should be viable, but we need help.
Okay, I'm wondering if we can put a label. Because would there be a clear label when someone's going through the issues and they can automatically see that it's unprioritized? I'm curious if there's like someone who wants to contribute, you can just say, hey, actually, we need help. Here's check out these unprioritized and see if anything interests you.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of question that I feel like we're going to get to. Like that's the kind of scenario that I would love to just like have that just fall out. So today we could say, well, if you look in the unprioritized backlog, like anything after Carvel accepted,
Yeah.
these ideally, this is not the state, this is not the case right now. We're talking about evolving, not the evolved process. But ideally, everything in here would be marked as ready for dev, for
Okay.
example. And then uh so yeah, so that's close. So like we're getting okay, you know, we're starting to get there now. Now, if everything in here actually had ready for dev, then we could say, oh, you want to contribute? Go take a look at the Zen Hub, look in the unprioritized backlog pipeline, and find something that you're interested in. Like, and that actually is not bad
Yeah.
at that
Mhm.
point because you
Yeah,
have the
I like that.
confidence that you've come through those other two swim lanes. Yeah, it'd be even better if it's clear that something's hanging out in unprioritized backlog only because we just haven't made a commitment as a maintainer team. Like, well, it's probably a strong consideration, but we don't know yet. Uh, or if it's like, yeah, it is not going to happen right now for like in terms of priority.
Mhm.
That is a potentially good segue to talk about the recommended label here. So if an issue is in that pipeline and someone sees it and says, actually, I don't think that those who are like officially kind of like setting the priorities like either see or understand the priority of this particular issue. You could drop a lightweight thing would just be to leave a comment and drop a flag, drop the label, the recommended label on there. And that means, hey, the next time you go to review the backlog, please look for the recommended, see if there's any recommended issues in the unprioritized and consider those. So that's one very lightweight way of asynchronously signaling we think this should be a priority. Now, that could also be a way for signaling this is a candidate for maybe being prioritized to the maintainer's backlog. So if you're not wanting to start on something that could get started on, the maintainers would like avoid that while that label is on that issue. And then, like I was saying, like these headings, these are the different roles. So the group that's like doing that prioritization, we call that the Balanced Leadership Team, or BLT for short. And what they'll be doing is looking to see either they're just straight up plucking issues out of the unprioritized backlog because they already know they're like, okay, we're going to pull these in now. These are ready to work, and we need to make sure that they're sufficient for pointing and shovel ready. And also, if there are specifically recommendations. So these are these kind of two steps that they could take. And this could be a way of like communicating back, hear what you said, here's some additional context that maybe is not clear or available or known, and this is why we think it may not be a priority right now. Remove recommended label. Cool. All right, and then the prioritized backlog is like the backlog for the maintainer teams. And so if anything is in that column, well, these are the epics, so we're really talking about the individual items here. These are things that the team is about to pick up, is slated to pick up soon. And this is like across the projects. I just have it filtered right now, but it's all of the Carvel stuff, all the Carvel repos. Cool. So then as a maintainer, you work a story. Here's something that we don't do consistently today is like assigning ourselves to the story to make it clear like who's working on what. That'd be great if we can sort of get to that. And if we're pairing at our pair, just kind of keep that up to date. And move it into progress. Somebody who's working it, you're working it. do the stuff. This is the meat of the sandwich. If it needs to stop, then ideally make sure that a branch is up to date. Try and serialize the context you have and say, I'm no longer working on this by pulling it out of progress. Because one thing that's not clear here is like, does it go back into the prioritized backlog? I guess if it's you would need to know or something. I don't know. Would you, sorry, if you're working on a story, if you're a maintainer, you know that if you're putting down a story that you would put it back into the prioritized backlog pipeline. But if you're contributing, and you got started on something, it got hairier than you expected, or life happens and you need to step back from it. It might be something that sits in the in progress ZenHub lane, but no longer has an in progress label or something. I don't know. Okay. And then from time to time, the community pair can also come over to this lane and look to see whether or not work is stalled. So this might be another situation where we've already got, like I was saying, we've got staling, automatic staling happening for community triage, Carvel triage. Maybe it'd be also great to have a staling for issues that are in progress where there's no activity. So that can be identified. We could drop a Carvel triage label on that. Cool. And I don't think there was too much defined past this. All right. And then the rest of this is describing like in more detail, like each of these links here jumps down into a workflow definition. That is a bad example. Some of these are better baked than others, but like, what does it mean to recommend a feature? So the verbiage is in this section that's in this process step description. So this is a great spot to kind of talk a little bit more, give a little more color about what do we mean, because these things up here are so terse at the top, intentionally to like help make it clear, like what's the actual workflow from state to state? What are the transitions? Thoughts, comments, things you see that'd be good next steps, gaps, things you're liking, things you want different.
So for example, like that in progress, are we trying to mimic the experience of ZenHub using labels?
Experience of 7 use cycles.
Because
so okay.
Because like in the end, if so, like we could be catering for people that don't want to use Zen hubs so they have like a way to see what things like how things are happening. Is that something that we're proposing here, or
That's a great question. And that that goes to like how accessible, visible, legible our backlog is. So if we say, well, you have to install a plugin in order to see it, that's just that and whether or not that is a barrier depends on the individual.
so if that's what we're trying to aim for, wouldn't it make sense for us to add labels for the prioritized backlog as well?
To like mark it as like slated for, or just call it prioritized.
Yeah. I'm just asking, like, if that's the idea, if that's the idea that we're trying to achieve here, then it would make sense. If not, if we're not trying to do that, I feel like that adding a tag, adding a label saying that is in progress, it's kind of, do you really need it?
What do people think?
I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think like that's where I sort of struggle with this the most, is like this need for people to take the information and labels and also combine it with the information in ZenHub instead of being able to just look at one thing and start from there. The in progress one, I think, to me is kind of unique. Like if I come into our issues as somebody looking to contribute and I want to find something contributable, should I care that it is, well, I think this is the question to answer. Should I care if it is in unprioritized, prioritized, or accepted lanes? Because I do care if it's in progress. Like that's something that I don't think is questionable. Like if I'm looking for something to contribute and it's already in progress, that's not something I should contribute. But to me, the question lies in, should I care what lane it's in as well? And if the answer there is no, then I think the in progress label is still useful, even if we don't add these other three.
Yeah, I think perhaps generally, yeah, okay, this is a great point. I think this gets to Joao's question generally, which is, are we trying to provide two views over the backlog, one through ZenHub and one through labels? Because they're like, you wouldn't need a whole bunch of labels if you just put stuff in ZenHub.
So backing up to the reason why we started using ZenHub. When I came on board, the team was using Tracker. So there wasn't a lot of visibility publicly on how the team was working on what was being prioritized and whatnot. So then ZenHub came about in order to alleviate that and talk back to GitHub so that people could see it publicly being worked on. So if there's a way for labels that might be in ZenHub, like say there's a label that says in progress or prioritized backlog, and it just talks back to the GitHub issues so that someone doesn't even have to install the plugin. They can just see the label there that it's in progress, or all the other labels that you have laid out, versus the need to go to ZenHub. Am I making sense? Like,
yeah, so I mean, I'm messing with it. I haven't used this a lot, but like there is a way to actually say things that don't have a label, for example. So there'd be a way to be able to describe at least the pile of issues that satisfy a category of like, it's ready for dev and it's not in progress.
Mhm.
So so that's sort of leaning toward the direction of, well, yeah, it'd be great if we provided a means for making, I don't know, say necessarily the issues legible without having to use ZenHub. If you just went with labels. And if you did that, if we're saying, yeah, we want to do that, then we would do it, for example, what I was talking about, I think, like continue on with like adding these label things to make sure it clear that like, oh, this is prioritized already. You wouldn't want to pick up a prioritized issue because now you're in a race with the maintainers. Like, you know. And so then there's two views over our repos. One view is just with labels, and the other view is in ZenHub. And we do the work to make them congruent so that whatever's sitting in unprioritized backlog, unlike today, everything in here would be ready for dev. And so all these things will move these back into Carvel accepted and then check that they have ready for dev and move them back into the unprioritized backlog.
I'm not a huge fan of that because that will add a lot of work that will need to happen just to move issues around. So like you'd have to go to ZenHub, you need to move it to a particular place. You need to be sure to add particular tags, remove particular tags. If you are in a specific backlog or something, it feels like that it's quite cumbersome just to maintain everything together, right? And yeah, I don't know.
So like if all of that was automatic, like moving an item into a particular swim lane, we could say, oh, anything leaving new issues must have been Carvel triaged, so we remove that label. And when it lands in certain, sorry, they're called pipelines. When it lands in a certain pipeline, it attaches certain labels. And so there's a whole bunch of that, like state type labels that get automatically managed. And there might be additional things like ready for dev. Maybe you need to do that. That's more of a manual check, perhaps. Yeah, because I'm with you. Like that sounds like a lot of work, and it's just a recipe for now things being less honest or less clear and less trustworthy as an organizing system. If things are accurate, if you look at it ZenHub, but they're inaccurate if you're just trying to use the labels. So this is sort of one question I have. Like, is that possible?
I saw there are like some sort of like automation on ZenHub, but the automation that I saw was related to workflows. And workflows are not, it is to like if you have two workspaces, you can coordinate between the two. Like if you move, for example, to Carvel accepted swim lane or to the pipeline, if you move something there, it will move in the other related workspace it to a different place. So in the end, I think that was the automation that I could see from ZenHub. And unfortunately, ZenHub doesn't use labels or anything to tell where things are. Because if it did, we could use something like prow to manage the labels on the GitHub side. Or
so you could do like slash commands to
something
move
like
stuff
that.
around. Okay. Well, I'm looking at the clock. We are at time here, but hey, I appreciate like having the space to be able to get together and talk about this kind of stuff. There's a number of things we can follow up on here and make improvements on this process no matter what. Yeah, and keep in mind, like you're saying, Joao, there's a practical limit to the work, the transactional cost of moving work around. So we need to figure out a way of trying to meet those needs. Cool, thank you.
Great. All right, thanks everyone. That was some really good discussion. And if you're watching this from home and you have some ideas that would be helpful for the team, or you want to contribute any of the experience that you've had with triaging issues, please feel free to join us at our next meeting. We have a community meeting next on June 7th. We meet every Monday, but we're not meeting next Monday due to a holiday. We also have our office hours every second and fourth Thursday of the month. And both of those meetings are at 11:30 a.m. Pacific time, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time. Otherwise, please join us in the Kubernetes Slack workspace in the Carvel channel, and bring up your ideas there. We would love to hear from you. We welcome any and all feedback regarding anything. If you need any help from the Carvel team, we're also eager to do that as well. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you.